Hello and welcome to our webinar. We will be covering pet birds and hormonal behavior part 2 today. So very happy to have Dr. Stephanie Lamb back with us to answer more questions about pet birds and hormonal behavior. And we definitely have a lot of questions. So this is a topic that is very relevant. So very happy to revisit this. We had the webinar last week on spring hormones and we're coming back to it today. So while we wait for everyone to log in, let's do another poll. So I'm going to launch our poll question for today. So if you're with us now, please give us your answer, give us your take on what you're experiencing. So the poll question that I'm asking today is, what is your biggest challenge dealing with hormones? Is it excessive screaming, aggression, bird trying to mate, destructive chewing, egg laying, or is it nesting behavior? Wow, we are getting them a pretty good difference of pretty big variety here. Excessive screaming, aggression, bird trying to mate, destructive chewing, egg laying, nesting behavior. It looks like aggression is definitely something that's a concern. That's 36% that I'm seeing so far, with followed by excessive screaming at 25%, egg laying at 14%, nesting behavior at 14%. Those two kind of go a little bit hand in hand. Destructive chewing is at 3%. So that's I guess that's a good thing, because I've seen what parrots can do to households, sometimes with destructive chewing, especially with woodwork. And looks like we have 11 people have answered aggression as being an issue for them. 9 people have excessive screaming. 5 people have replied with egg laying, and 4 with nesting behavior, and 1 with the destructive chewing. So I'll give you a little bit more time to log in and answer our poll for today. All right, yep. It looks like aggression and excessive screaming are the top 2. We're at 35% for aggression and 26% for excessive screaming. I'm going to give you another 10, 20 seconds here. Put your answers in if you can. And I'm going to end the poll. All right, here are the results. So aggression at 37% of the answers, followed by excessive screaming at 26%, and egg laying at 14%, nesting behavior at 11%, bird trying to mate at 9%, and destructive chewing at 3%. All right, thank you for everyone who just participated in the poll. That's some interesting but not surprising answers, considering what some of the top hormonal behaviors that we find ourselves dealing with. And thank you. All right, so I'll be your host today again. My name is Laura Doering, and our topic is pet birds and hormonal behavior part 2. Last week we did pet birds and hormonal behavior, I guess part 1 you could say, and it definitely we definitely got a lot of questions about pet birds and what their hormones might be causing them to do, especially this time of year. So we'd love to get some more questions. We have some ones that we will be answering first that we have left over from last week. And a reminder to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Don't use the chat button, use the Q&A button. If you use the Q&A button, we can capture your question and an answer and email you the answer if we don't get to it today. So please use the Q&A button, and also, of course, try to keep your question relevant to the topic. Of course, we are doing more webinars and we'll be covering more topics in the future. So today it's all about pet birds and hormones. With that, I would like to welcome back our awesome special guest, Dr. Stephanie Lamb. She is an avian veterinarian from Arizona, and she is going to answer some more questions for us on pet birds and hormonal behavior. So Dr. Lamb, welcome back.
Thank you.
And if you don't mind, I mean, we can just dive straight into questions, or do you have anything that
Yeah, if you want to just go ahead and start with the questions, I'm happy to start answering.
All right, here we go. Here we go. So Kathleen asks, I have 5 cockatiel boys who were fine in one cage, but now I had to separate them. 2 pairs are bonded, and the 5th is singing to one of the boys in the pairs and shredding paper. The boys are trying to mount each other, which ends in an argument. Should I stop it once it starts or let them work it out themselves?
Well, those definitely sound like a lot of hormonal behaviors. Mounting for sure is a hormonal behavior, but the paper shredding is definitely the singing to one another. I guess the question of should you separate them is going to kind of depend on how much. What is it that they're actually doing when they start to be a little aggressive towards one another? If they're just doing like a little beak boxing, sometimes you'll have 2 birds that maybe get into a little bit of an argument. Certainly there's a lot being said between our individual birds that we don't understand, but they're communicating with one another, and sometimes maybe they have a little argument and they may just kind of tap beaks on one another lightly, and maybe vocalize a little bit, and then they separate. If that's a real just quick thing that's happening and it's really mild, then that's probably okay to just let them work those sort of things out. But if you have an individual who's getting really upset by one of the other boys being really hormonal with him and he doesn't feel very amorous, and not excited about his advances, and he's really, they're starting to fight where they are maybe grabbing feathers. If feathers are being pulled, that's could potentially escalate into something worse. I would say the most common injuries that I see between birds getting into fights is going to be on the beak and on the feet. Those are the 2 places that where birds are coming in where there's been bird on bird aggression. And there can be some pretty serious damage that happens to those beaks, and the toes. I've had birds that have had their beaks punctured. I've had birds where the beak has actually been torn off. I have had birds miss toes. You definitely do not want to get into those sort of situations. So if you're seeing them get aggressive towards one another and it is feathers are being pulled, there's like more than just a little chirp going on and they're screaming, that would probably be best to separate them. Give them their own cage, give them their own time. But again, if it's just more like a little beak boxing where they get bickering a little bit, and they just kind of tap the beak, then that's probably okay to let them figure it out. But I would be really attentive to what the actual behaviors are, what the actual fighting is, because you don't want it to escalate to a point where you end up at the veterinary office later in the day, unexpectedly. So
Good point. I have a follow-up question that's on a similar thing about how birds being housed together. This one is from Barbara. She says, I have 2 rescued male cockatiels who became bonded. One is extremely aggressive and will attack me even if I'm not close to their cage. Is there anything I can do to ameliorate the situation?
yeah, so I guess one question I have for that is, were those 2 individuals always bonded together since they were brought into the home, or did they come into the home bonded together? It's certainly the one who is being aggressive is probably feeling like he is protecting the other individual, and so that is a hormonal thing because that is his friend, that's his mate, and he feels like he is having to protect that bird. So for him, that's a normal behavior to have to tell other individuals, hey, get away from this mate of mine because I have to protect him. But that might not then allow for the best sort of pet situation, because if that individual is so focused on his friend and not focused on the owner has to decide, what kind of situation do they want their bird to have. If they want their 2 birds to interact and be friends and be mates, and the owner themselves isn't interested in necessarily having that real one-on-one relationship with the birds, then it's probably okay to just let them be as they are. But if the owner really wants to have probably the pet that they were originally hoping to have in their home, then they might need to be going back to what we talked about last week, looking at the cues that are making these birds be hormonal and adjusting those cues to try to ameliorate that aggressive behavior that the one individual has, where he feels like he's protecting the other. And again, ways to just quickly go over what we talked about last week of ways to reduce environmental signals to make birds feel less hormonal, making sure they're only getting the amount of food that they need per day so that they don't have an abundance of food, making sure they're not getting high fat, making sure that they don't have long day lengths, low humidity, no nest, no nesting materials. And for cockatiels in particular, they can be stimulated by vocalizations from their mates. So sometimes you do need to really separate these two birds and potentially have them in different parts of the house where they can't hear one another, to kind of snap them out of being hormonal. And then the other thing is redirecting their attention to more appropriate behaviors. And so working with them and doing things like trick training with them to cue them to do particular behaviors is a good way to start communication with the bird, and gradually work up to them becoming more able to come out of the cage and hang out with you and sit on your hand and do the interactions maybe that the owner originally wanted with their birds. And it's not to say that you can't have them together and still work on those things, because you can. I mean, you could potentially have those two individuals together, work on adjusting all those environmental cues, having the low day length, having it so they don't have an abundance of food. And you can start working on them with doing your positive reinforcement, trick training behaviors with them. Reserving their treats for times when you want to interact with them and want to start doing trick training so that they have a high value reward to be received during times when you're working on trick training with them. Even just trick training them and teaching them how to target train to different parts of the cage can be this first step in getting that aggressive individual to start interacting with the owner. So I really do like trick training quite a bit. I mean, it allows for owners to start communicating with their birds. And when birds understand what we're trying to ask them to do, they can become really excited and engaged, and they seem to really enjoy it as well. So I think trick training can be used in a lot of situations, and in these hormonal situations can be certainly used to help owners out to have a better relationship with their pets. So
Great. I kind of have a question about them being in the cage. Do you think rotating them like onto a play gym, or spending time out back, can kind of lessen the territorialness in the cage, or can it play a positive role, like having them come out into a play gym for either together or apart for certain amounts of time? For
sure.
trick training, right? Too.
Yeah. So sure. I mean, because again, sometimes when birds are feeling hormonal, the cage to them can sometimes feel like this is my home and this is my nest. And what do when they are hormonal? Naturally, they want to protect their resources. And their cage is their resource. If they think of their cage as their nest, they may be very sensitive about other individuals being in there, and they may be more likely to be aggressive around the cage. And so getting them out of the cage into a more neutral environment where they don't feel like they have any a particular area is maybe not one of their resources or necessarily one of their like safe zones, can be helpful to get them to be more likely to interact with an owner in a positive manner. And also probably a good place to start with them with doing trick training stuff, because they may be a little more interested in interacting with people outside of their little home environment, inside of their safe little cage. So.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's some good advice there. My next question is more along the lines of the length of what to expect as far as time-wise goes. Allison asks, my 23-year-old umbrella cockatoo has been with us just 12 months. Every time she is with me, she is huffy, if you get what she means. She will even be huffy on her own in the cage. I know not to encourage her, so as if she tries to cuddle up, I carefully remove her to another place. But she keeps coming back, and in the end, she has to go back to the cage. I miss our normal interaction, and I know she does too. How long will this last, and is there anything I can do?
Well, as far as how long it's going to last, that's really hard for me to answer that question. Birds, so first off, what I should say is hormones are supposed to happen during a particular season. So like right now with it being springtime, that's why we are seeing more birds having these hormonal issues popping up, because again, their body is being cued into environmental signals that tell them right now is the time to be hormonal. And so in the wild, they're looking at all those cues of day length, heat, humidity, abundance of foods, to tell them now is the time to be hormonal. And when you get to later in the summertime, and the day length starts to decrease, the heat starts to decrease, humidity starts to decrease. As we start to go into fall, then that's the signal to say, oh, winter's coming. It is time to be done being hormonal, because now we got to be prepared for it being cold and you know, our babies are now grown up. We need to move on. So in the wild, they would be cued to stop being hormonal. So it is supposed to be during a specific time of year. However, being in captivity, where we create these really pristine, perfect environments that are very safe, we have long day lengths in captivity because we keep lights on for us when we're home in the evenings. We keep temperatures at nice, ideal temperatures indoors. We provide birds with a safe environment that to us may just be a cage, but to them could potentially be something that they think of as really their territory and their almost nest-like area. We provide them with great food. We provide them with social interactions that they might misinterpret as us being doing pair bonding things with them. So we create all these environmental cues that are perfect and tell them it's time to be hormonal, and we can do those things all year long because we are controlling our environments. So sometimes we keep our birds hormonal all year long, which is not ideal for sure, because that's when we start to run into a lot of behavioral issues or medical problems with birds. So how long is it going to last? Hard for me to say, because it could potentially, a bird could stay hormonal indoors all year long. The other part of that question, I think, of how long is it going to last, could potentially be like asked in the form of, you know, are birds ever going to be stop being hormonal as they become geriatric or older? And though some birds do kind of become less hormonal as they get more and more mature and senior, I have met some senior birds that are still very hormonal. And I mean, I've even met some birds that didn't start laying eggs until they're in their 30s, you know, so they can physiologically stay hormonal and be hormonally cycling in older age, you know. And I don't know that we necessarily know really well how at what age are they supposed to stop being hormonal. I don't think we really have that figured out.
Okay.
So it's a little hard for me to answer that part of the question, because we still have so much more we need to learn about these guys.
Wow. Okay, that kind of answers dives a little bit into the next question, which is by Lydia. She has a 25-year-old African gray who often tries to mate with my foot. Is this ever going to stop? Do they outgrow these hormones at a certain age?
Yeah. I don't, it's hard for me to say. And again, a 25-year-old African gray isn't very old, you know. African grays can live quite a long time. So, you know, he's still got probably half his life, if not a little more, to go. So for him, he could be hormonal up until he's 50, 60, and he may not stop. There are some birds that, yes, I would say I've had owners come in and say, oh, they used to be so hormonal, but now they're a little older. They've gotten a little bit more mature, and they're not as hormonal as they used to be. And, you know, I don't know how much of that is because they're truly becoming seniors versus maybe the owners are interacting with them differently than when they were younger, and maybe the owners didn't understand as much about how to interact with the hormonal bird, and now they've worked around figuring out what is it that makes this bird hormonal, so I'm not going to do this in my home. So now they're being better about being less hormonal.
Oh man. Okay, so we've got Laura here, and she's a first-time parrot mom, so she can use this advice. She's got a lively 12-year-old conure adopted from a rescue. Are these hormonal changes temporary? And if so, how long will it last? So kind of like we talked about last week too with the
yeah. So we hope that they're temporary. We hope that it's springtime. It's just going to be hormonal for maybe a couple of months, and that this will, as environmental signals change, he'll become less hormonal. But again, because we're indoors and we have this perfect environment, he could potentially stay hormonal really, really quite a long time. So that's when we go back to, okay, what can we do to make them feel less hormonal in our homes? And we look at those environmental cues and things that we can do to redirect their attention. Now, I'm glad we're talking specifically about a conure here, because there is one thing that I kind of want to bring up. Again, when we're looking at those environmental cues, we're looking at our light, heat, humidity, food, nesting material, all those sort of things. I just want to touch really quickly on nests, particularly with the conures, because I think they're the ones that I see the most problems with. So there are different types of nesting objects out on the market that people can go and purchase from a pet store or purchase online. And in particular, one of the things that a lot of people will get is these little, they're like little triangular huts. And they are little things that birds can crawl into to rest and sleep in. Those little triangular huts are basically like a nice little nest for them to crawl into. And I think a lot of times when people buy them, they don't necessarily think that, oh, this is going to turn into a nest. But the birds look at it and they go, wow, what a perfect little cavity. And again, a lot of our parrots are cavity nesters. They're not necessarily making these stick nests that we a lot of times think about with some of the little passerine, the songbirds that we have outdoors where we can go find a nest in a tree outside. Parrots are typically cavity nesters, so they see nice little dark spaces as the perfect thing to go into and feel really hormonal in. And in particular, it seems like a lot of people will buy conures, these little huts. So not only can those be very hormonally stimulating, the other thing, a word of caution about those, is I have had many birds chew those things up. And when they're made of fabric, which there's some that are not made of fabric, but there are several that are made of fabric. If they chew those up and they're made of fabric and the bird swallows those things, birds really shouldn't be swallowing fabric. Fabric can be very dangerous to them, and they can get obstructions with those. And I've had it happen most commonly in conures. So it's something that if I have a conure owner coming into the hospital, if they tell me that they have one of those huts, or if I see one of those huts hanging out in their cages, I always have to tell them, oh, I highly recommend not having that for hormone reasons, and also for accidents that can happen with those. So I would, I'm glad we specifically talked about a conure because that is something I wanted to bring up.
I had that very same experience with my conure with the head, so I had to remove it.
Yeah, yeah.
So now I actually have a question about food triggers. Peter asks, my Congo African gray loves dry corn and grapes as treats, and I've read those can be awful when they are hormonal, maybe because of the starch. Do I need to restrict those treats?
Um, okay, so for that, um, you know, the corn is a great carbohydrate, you know, and the grapes, those are also providing a lot of carbohydrates and, you know, sugars. I don't know that them in and of themselves are necessarily hormonal inducing, but if they're getting a lot of those things, then the calories that you're getting from those, if you're getting more calories than you need, again, that is a trigger for being hormonal. Because if you have an abundance of calories, you have an abundance of food, then it makes the bird go, okay, well, I've got resources that I need to be able to feed some babies. And actually, I did get together a little bit of information on calorie needs for birds that I could do a screen share on. I know someone last week had asked about that, and we had talked about with trying to only feed them the amount that they need per day and not giving them an abundance of calories. There are specific calculations that are done. And I still maintain that, yes, it's best to have your bird checked out by your veterinarian to figure out specifically what your bird's individual calorie needs are, because, you know, just like people, everybody has a little bit different in what their calorie needs are. Same thing with birds. But I did get sort of a list together of, if we have a bird of a particular species that's a healthy weight, living indoors, you know, what would its calorie needs be? So I could screen share that right now. And I even gave an example in this, in what I got together for an individual bird of what we could do to give it the amount of food it needs per day. So,
Oh, great.
are you okay? You screen share that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let me do that. We're going to go to this. And okay. So these are some typical calorie needs for birds that are healthy, birds that are living indoors, and I said with minimal flight. So maybe, you know, they don't necessarily have to be clipped, but certainly the amount of flight that they're doing indoors compared to the amount of flight that a bird is doing in the wild is quite different. So even if they're flying around our homes, it's nothing like what they're doing in the wild, where they're flying to various locations all day long. So what I did here is I show a particular species and an average weight, and how many calories a bird of that particular weight would need. So if we look, for example, since we were talking about the African gray, if we have an African gray that's about 400 grams, and this is just sort of a typical weight. There are some African grays that are a little smaller than this. There's some African grays that are much bigger than this. But if we have about a 400 gram African gray, the amount of calories that that bird needs is only 79 calories a day. So a lot of times when people look at that, they go, oh my gosh, that's really not that much, because, you know, we think about our diets and, you know, the average person needs somewhere around 2,000 calories a day. Again, it varies from one person to the next, their activity level, their health status, all of that. And that same stuff applies to birds. So this is just a generalization, but you can see they really don't need a huge amount of calories per day. If we have a bird who is hormonal and they are nesting and raising a family, their calorie need is going to be a lot higher than this. So if we feed more than these calories, then that could be stimulating to them to make them feel hormonal. So, but, you know, that's the amount of calories. How much food does that actually equate to? Well, there's lots of different bird foods on the market. There's various different types of pellets. And when you look at the different types of pellets that are out there, they do have quite a range in the calorie content. And so like the range is actually I'll convert this to grams of food. So it's like 3.2 calories per gram of food to 3.6 calories per gram of food that you're feeding when it comes to pellets. So you really need to look at the individual type of pellets that you're feeding to a bird to know, okay, exactly how much pellets do I need to feed this individual. I also put Ava cakes up there because a lot of people use those as well as a balanced food source. And, you know, per gram of Ava cake, it varies depending upon which Ava cake you're using. So it's really important to talk to your veterinarian about what your bird needs specifically and have them come up with a good diet plan. But general recommendations when we're looking at some of the pellets that are out there on the market is going to equate to, when we're again looking back at our different species, these volumes of food. So if we go back to our African gray, that's about 400 grams, somewhere between 2 to 2.5 tablespoons of food is what that bird is going to be needing in a day for amount of food. And then I did also do an example. So an umbrella cockatoo, let's take a female umbrella cockatoo. Let's say she weighs about 550 grams, which is about an average size for a healthy female umbrella. She lives indoors. Her wings are clipped, but she's moderately active. She plays with her toys. She walks across the floor. She climbs on her play gym. So she's doing things throughout the day. But she's hormonal. And her owners don't want her to be hormonal. So what does she need as an individual? So if she came into the hospital to see me, and if I did my exam and she looked like a healthy bird and I had all these stipulations about her, then I would calculate her calorie needs to be somewhere around 99.6 calories a day. So about 100 calories a day. So I then ask the owner, well, what does she normally eat? And if our birds are eating pellets and then fresh food items as well, as an example, let's say she's eating Lafeber's pellets and then she's also getting some fresh vegetables and fruits. Well, I want about 80% of her diet to be balanced, you know, and that's going to be her pellets, with the other 20% being those other fresh items. So if I look at my calories, then 80% of my calories, if I want them to come from pellets, is going to be 79.7 calories. And the remaining 20% or 19.9 calories can come from other foods. We can certainly round here. It doesn't have to be super specific, but so if I'm looking at the type of pellets that she's eating, let's say she's eating the Lafeber's pellets that are meant specifically for cockatoos, that's the calorie content that they have. So it's 3.29 calories per gram of food. So when I do my calculations, I find out that, okay, she needs to be eating about 24 grams of pellets a day. And when I get a measuring spoon and I kind of measure this out, that 24 grams of pellets of that particular type of pellet is going to equate to about 3 tablespoons of pellets. Now, she's also getting about 20% of her food as other items, fresh vegetables and fruits. So then I often will come up with a list of foods that that individual bird likes to eat, and we actually look at how many calories are in those individual food items. So I just put up a few different types of food items here that she, you know, would like to potentially be eating, and how many calories are actually in these smaller volumes. So, you know, green peas, 1 tablespoon of green peas is going to be about 7 calories. 1 grape is 2 calories. You know, so, and there's, you know, we could do this for all different types of fresh food items, but I know that I can select for this bird about 20 calories a day from this list of foods. So then I'll give examples of what owners could do at home to change it up a bit. Every day she's going to get her 3 tablespoons of pellets, but then as her fresh items to meet her daily calorie need, we can mix it up a bit. So maybe one day she's going to get a teaspoon of pinto beans, which is going to be 14 calories, plus a tablespoon of bell peppers, which is only 3 calories, and 1 grape. So that's going to, you know, get us somewhere close to that 20 calories a day of fresh food items. And, you know, I give different examples for different days just so she doesn't have to eat the exact same thing every day, because who wants to eat the same thing every day? That's boring. So we keep it a little bit variety for her. But now the owners have a list of, okay, this is what I need to feed her to keep her in that daily calorie need that she specifically needs to make sure I'm not going overboard. So for our question about the African gray who was eating some of the corn, if we go back, we can see that, well, okay, corn is for 1 tablespoon, 8.3 calories. A grape is 2 calories. So for that particular owner who is wanting to know, how much corn or grapes should I be giving my bird, looking at that individual's calorie needs and then doing these calculations to sort of figure out how much could we safely be giving to this bird without making it go overboard on its calories would be a beneficial thing to do. And that's something that you can, you know, meet with your veterinarian, figure out what your specific bird needs, and come up with these diet plans.
Yeah. I noticed a trend that all these tend to be using measuring spoons instead of, say, handfuls or cups of foods. So
yeah, it because, you know, they're small, right? And so to make it a bit more accurate, using the little teaspoon, tablespoons amounts makes it easier, less room for error.
yes, good point.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing here. So, okay.
Oh man, that was awesome. Thank you. That was super helpful.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hopefully, I think that answered the question about the grapes and the corn. So we have a question about temperature. Stacy asks, I'm fairly strict on diet and daylight hours, but I have one who laid eggs in December and then got really ill from hormonal issues. She's better now, but has been hormone implant since in January, has a hormone implant in January, and now started nesting behavior. Any other modifications I can make? Is temperature a factor? And she nests in her cage substrate, so it's not easy to remove. And she's careful not to stimulate her in any way or react to signs of regurgitation.
Okay. Yeah. So, you know, I guess specifically with heat, yes, heat is a stimulus for them to be a little bit hormonal because, again, when springtime's coming around, temperatures are rising, it's getting warmer out. But that one, of all the different ones that we're able to adjust, I have to say that's not a typical one that I really play around with too much with birds. Birds, man, they have a lot higher body temperature than we do. And one of the things that we do just to provide like supportive care when a bird is sick is heat. I mean, because in order for them to maintain an appropriate high body temperature that they have, which their body temperatures can be up to like 106 Fahrenheit, which is, you know, pretty hot compared to us, right? We would be in the hospital if we had a temperature that high. But you know, they have to have really high metabolic demands to meet temperatures that high. And if they're not feeling well, their body's putting too much energy into warming themselves up. And so in the hospitals, we're putting them on heat a lot of times when they're not feeling well so that they don't have to have their metabolism be working too hard at keeping their body temperatures up. So I would say I don't really mess around with heat to make them feel less hormonal. I think all those other factors we've talked about are good ways to make them feel less hormonal. Now, this particular bird had an implant in January. Here we are in May. The implants, you know, in the studies that we have done so far show that they're supposed to last about 6 months for parrots. But there is variation. And, you know, she might be an individual who needs another implant sooner, like placed again sooner than 6 months. She might be a bird that needs it at 4 months. You know, I have had that happen before where there are some birds that they just kind of burn through those implants a little bit more quickly. So.
Okay, and then I have a question. Let's see, about a 23-year-old umbrella cockatoo named Sammy. She's been with us for just over a year, and her previous owners who had her since a youngster said that she laid an egg once in her life. She has been very hormonal for about 2 weeks, and we have absolutely ignored her behavior. This morning she laid an egg. what is the best thing to do? Previously, when we had conures lay eggs, we simply left them in the until the bird got bored. Is this the right thing to do this time? Sammy is not in terribly good condition. She has a history of plucking, something that she suspects to be hormonal, and is underweight. Her diet before she came to us was very poor, and we haven't made all that much progress in getting her to accept better nutrition. That's from Allison.
Okay. So, you know, there is a little bit of difference from one bird to the next in whether or not you leave an egg after they have laid it. For some individuals, leaving an egg behind after a bird has laid it can be hormonally stimulating in and of itself, because now I have this baby and it's so cute, this little egg. I need to sit on it. I need to take care of this. So for lots of birds, we tell owners to take those eggs away, and then of course be working on all your environmental cues to stop them from feeling hormonal. Redirecting their attention to foraging, trick training, those things. If she's getting to the bottom of the cage and she's tearing up paper, then that's nesting material. You might need to be putting a grate on the bottom of the cage. Some owners have grates on the bottoms of their cages for birds that make it so they can't get to those papers. Some owners don't. I have to say with my own birds, some of my bird cages have grates and some of them don't have grates. So it depends on the individual bird that I have as to whether or not I have a grate down. So for most cases, I would say we typically have people remove eggs. However, there are some birds that are called determinant layers. And determinant layers are birds that want to lay a specific set number of eggs. And when they reach that set number of eggs, then they stop laying. And those are budgies. So budgerigars, if they're laying, I usually tell owners, okay, you can leave those eggs, or the other thing that we can do is we can get fake eggs and we can put fake eggs in so that they get to their like 5 to 6 eggs that they like to lay, and once they reach that 6th egg, then they go, oh, I've laid all my eggs, I counted my eggs, this is how many I'm supposed to have, and I'm going to stop being hormonal, or I'm going to at least stop laying. I may still be a bit hormonal, but I will stop laying and stop putting my body through the stress of going through having to produce an egg, and sort of trick them that way. So it is a little different depending upon the species we're looking at. For a cockatoo, I would say I probably would first thing recommend removing it. And then if the owners are already working on all those environmental cues, going back to that diet, looking at that diet, how much are we giving, redirecting their attention to more appropriate behaviors, start working on trick training. But maybe this also is a bird who does need some hormonal support and suppression with those medical things like Lupron or Deslorelin potentially.
Okay, thank you. So this is an interesting question too. We've got from Carrie, and she asks, is it okay to let your bird masturbate on its perch?
I guess it depends on the bird. When it does those behaviors, is it also causing behavioral problems in the home? If it is having issues like screaming, biting, being aggressive, then maybe stopping it from doing those behaviors would be best. If it does those behaviors and then everything's fine and it comes out and life is great and it is not disrupting the relationship that the owners have with the bird, then it's probably okay. So that's where you have to ask yourself as an individual, what's going on in my home? Is this disrupting our lives or not? And if it is, then we need to probably work on it and adjust it. So.
All right, thank you for that answer. So Judith asks, my 30-year-old African gray, who we think is a female, sometimes fluffs her feathers and lowers her wings while vocalizing. Sometimes during this, she will regurgitate a seed or two into my hand. I assume this is mating behavior, but would like to know what you think.
Absolutely, that's definitely mating behavior. One of my African grays that I have at home loves to do that same stuff towards my husband. He's the favorite. So yeah, when she does that stuff, we have to go up, nope, you know, move her away, get up, walk away. We're going to ignore that behavior and then give it a couple moments and, okay, now let's do something different. Let's have you go over here. Let's have you, you know, do this particular trick. Let's get you interested in this foraging item. This is a lot of fun. Look at this, you know. So yes, those are definitely hormonal behaviors from an African gray.
Okay. Is that gender specific? Do you see one gender doing regurgitation behavior over the other, like females versus males? Or is
Not necessarily, not with regurgitation behavior, I don't think. It seems to be, I would say in the birds I've met, it's pretty evenly spread.
even seems okay. Lori asks, my 2-year-old female cockatiel started to self-destruct last week by losing weight and plucking. She has been housed with a new juvenile male, and she wants to mate with. I have moved her to another bird room and fed her Emicare IC through syringe and had follow-up vet appointment to check her weight and check her health. How long should I keep her separated from the male? When reintroduced, should they be in separate cages? I have 8 birds in total, 6 lovebirds, 2 just weaned in a nursery with a female cockatiel, and 2 cockatiels, male in a big bird room with 4 lovebirds.
Okay. Well, so I guess the question is do you want this bird to be hormonal in the long run or not? Cockatiels, I feel like, are one of the more difficult birds when it comes to being hormonal. And definitely we do know about cockatiels is that if they even hear the vocalizations of a male cockatiel, a female cockatiel hears the vocalizations of a male cockatiel or her mate, then that can keep her hormonal. And so how, you know, if we want these birds to go back together, but this girl is really hormonal, and we don't want her to be hormonal, I don't know if she can successfully go back with him in the long run. And it might be good for them to be separate. Now, if she is a type of bird who's hormonal only during particular times of year and very dependent upon environmental cues, then maybe you keep her separate during hormone season. You know, so she's separate for the next several months until daylight starts to get less, starts to get a little colder, those sort of things. But man, cockatiels are, I would say, one of the most difficult to stop from being hormonal. And if we really don't want to have problems with her being hormonal, she might be best to not be around him in the long run. It might be best for them to be on different parts of the house potentially. So, I mean, you can always try it again and see, you know, after hormone season passes, how they do together. But I would be mindful of the hormonal behavior she's doing and cautious that it could potentially, she could stay hormonal all the time with him. So again, our perfect environments that we have in our homes just kind of set them up for that.
Okay. So I have a question from Joanne. She asks, I have 2 female lineated parakeets that are cage mates and keep laying eggs. Both have been laying eggs for weeks. I have left the eggs on the floor as I didn't want to promote more egg laying, but they continue to tunnel under anything I place on the bottom of the cage to catch droppings and continue to lay eggs. How can I stop this behavior? I try to cover the cage for 10 to 12 hours each night.
Well, so it sounds like if they're tunneling under things, they must have access to the papers and stuff at the bottom of the cage. So honestly, this is a situation where probably having a grate at the bottom of the cage would be ideal. Because if there is a grate, then the droppings and old food and stuff is going to fall beyond that grate, and it's going to be caught by the papers underneath, but then the birds can't access those papers. I have seen birds, of course, that are sometimes really hormonal and still try to reach between those grate bars and rip the papers up from underneath. So sometimes grates need to be elevated a little bit, or the tray underneath needs to be dropped further so the bird can't reach that paper underneath. But yeah, if these particular individuals are being really hormonally stimulated because they're getting underneath that paper, blocking access to that paper might be the best thing for these particular birds.
Okay. Tessa, she's a veterinary student here. I don't own a bird, but I would like to go in aquatic avian medicine. Why don't all pet bird owners put their birds on Deslorelin implants? I don't know if
Why not? Yeah. Well, because I think it's something that isn't going to work for every single individual. And if we can work on environmental cues and behavioral modification techniques to stop a bird from being hormonal, that's going to be the better thing in the long run. Because, we don't want to necessarily be using medications to manage everything all the time. If we can manage things without medications, that's ideal. That's what we really want. It's less expensive for owners because it can become costly with Lupron and Deslorelin. And it's more natural to not be using medications. So if we can manage them with behavioral modification techniques and not having the signals that tell them to be hormonal, that is the better way to manage them in the long run.
Oh, okay. Joan asks, shall I ignore my 7-year-old green cheek conure when she rubs her bottom on my hand? Is her nibbling on the skin on the back of my hand 10 to 15 minutes at a time hormonal behavior? It seems to pacify her.
So the rubbing her bottom is masturbation behavior. Probably best for her to not do those behaviors to her owner, only because, you know, her owner's not a bird. And it could potentially, in the long run, allow us to run into some behavioral problems later on or medical problems later on. If it's a female, it could potentially be making her hormonal and have egg laying issues, and we don't want that, because I certainly have had that happen before where owners have allowed their bird to be hormonal with them, and then the birds eventually did run into some problems. So best to, if she does those behaviors on you, to pick her up, move her over, give her a moment to just have a moment for herself, and then, okay, now let's interact when you're being a good girl, and let's do something that's more purposeful. Now, the chewing on the back of the hand, what she's probably doing, if it's very gentle, is probably feeling like she's preening you, which a little bit of preening is okay, because a little bit of preening can be, we're friends, and I'm just being nice with you. But if she's sitting there doing it for long periods of time, 10, 15 minutes, that's a lot of preening, which is something that's more commonly happening between two mated, bonded pairs, which is just going to strengthen that pair bonding between you guys, but could make her be hormonal and could potentially put us in these situations later on down the road where we have problems behaviorally or medically. So, if she wants to do a little bit of grooming, okay, but maybe keep it to just like a minute, and then let's do something else. Let's start to have fun doing some commands, or again, getting into foraging, something else to take up our time doing something purposeful, as opposed to really solidifying this pair bond between us, because we'll never be able to be a pair with our birds in the way that nature intended. So let's be friends. Let's not be bonded mates.
Good point. Just like you with any other pets that you might have.
Yeah.
So Charlene asks, my 24-year-old African gray has laid eggs 3 to 4 times over the past 2 years. She has no attachment to them, and they just fall to the floor. How can I continue to be affectionate to her with a beak and head rubbing without triggering her mating behavior and regurgitating that inevitably leads to egg laying?
Well, keeping it to a minimum. And what I mean by that is, like, don't sit for long periods of time stroking her head and beak and everything. Just a little head scratch is good, just for a moment. We're going to give you a little head scratch. Oh, you're a good bird, and then, oh, let's now go do something else. And you can, when it comes to trick training stuff, you can pair those little head scratches with doing behaviors, because that little head scratch that she gets could be her reward. A lot of times when we talk about trick training, we're usually using our reward for whatever behavior it is we want them to do with a little piece of food. But it doesn't have to be a piece of food. Not all birds are motivated by food rewards. Birds can be motivated by, little touch rewards too. And so if we start to teach her how to do tricks and things, and now we reward her with, okay, you get a little head scratch, but it's only for a moment, then that's more, you're interacting with her, you're satisfying the need that you have as well, because we all want to sit there and cuddle and love on our birds. I mean, I want to do it too, you know. But because we know that it can lead to these problems, we have to restrain ourselves a little bit. So short periods of those scratches are what you want to focus on. And if you pair it with other positive things, then that could be rewarding for bird and human.
Okay, let's see. We have a question from Carol. She says, if a bird, she has a yellow-naped Amazon, persists in springtime behavior, but doesn't include egg laying, does it take a toll on the health of the bird? I tried my best to distract, to stop the behavior, but I work from home and cannot always address.
You know, it depends, because even if they're not laying eggs, what can happen normally physiologically in their body is fat levels can increase. They can actually have certain fats increase in their body in association with hormones. And you can have things like what we call egg yolk strokes. Last week I had showed a picture of a bird that had a head tilt problem because it had a egg yolk stroke, where basically those fat levels got really, really high in the blood, and then it acted like a little embolism and clogged up a blood vessel and prevented blood flow to a particular area. We also see fatty liver problems more. And the other thing I will note that there's still a whole lot more we need to learn about with this particular problem is we do see hormonal birds and female hormonal birds in particular be more likely to develop atherosclerosis lesions, which are like hardening of the arteries, so heart problems, than birds that aren't hormonal. So yes, there are other medical problems that can happen unassociated with just laying eggs that could be detrimental for the bird in some ways. So.
Okay, and I think we have time for one final question. This comes from Eileen, and she asks, does clipping wing and nails help stem the aggression related to hormonal behavior?
Not the nails. As far as the wings go, you know, there's some debate about that, I guess, that you could say. In when you clip their wings, they can't fly away from you. They become more dependent upon you to move them around to get to one place or another. I don't know how well it really is used as a helpful thing to stop a bird from being hormonal. It certainly gives an owner more control over their bird to move their bird to and from certain places, because it makes their bird more dependent upon them. But I wouldn't say that in and of itself stops hormonal behavior or reduces it in any way.
Okay, well, I think that is all we have time for today. If we didn't get to your question, we will do our best to send you an email answer with it. So keep a lookout in your inbox for that. For those who have logged on and didn't have a chance to have their questions answered, these are really good questions. So I'm glad that we had a chance to address those today. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Lamb, for
you're welcome.
tackling those sometimes difficult questions. I know it's a very it can be a frustrating issue for pet bird owners. So I really appreciate the insight that you had to offer. And to let our viewers know that if you keep a lookout for our newsletter and go on our website, lafeber.com, pet birds, for our next webinar information, we will be sending some an email news. Our newsletter will go out with when we have the next webinar. Next Friday is the holiday weekend, so we'll be taking a break then, but we'll be back on with another exciting webinar topic to tackle for y'all. And I'm sure we'll see Dr. Lamb back too, because she's just been like our mainstay here. She's been awesome with all these webinars, and I know that I truly appreciate it, and I hope our viewers do too. So in the meantime, everybody stay healthy, stay safe, and all the best to you and your flock. Bye.
Bye.